They laughed when Matthew Cole pushed his self-built car into pit lane flat silver paint. No logo, no sponsor, no name anyone recognized on the bodywork. They laughed when he signed the entry list beside drivers who had stood on podiums. They laughed when his 7-year-old daughter pressed against the fence, waving a handmade sign above her head. Richard Vance, 4-time defending champion, laughed the loudest, the longest, the most certain. None of them paid attention to the sound of that engine turning over in the garage. None of them thought they needed to. They should have. What happens when an ordinary father walks onto a professional track and makes every single person fall silent? Find out now. Matthew did not look at the other crews. He backed the trailer to the edge of his assigned bay, set the brake, and climbed down from the cab the way a man climbs down from something he has driven for 100,000 miles without thinking about it. He was 34 years old, with the kind of hands that told you everything about him before he opened his mouth. There were calluses at the base of every finger. There was grease under his thumbnail that no amount of scrubbing had ever fully reached. He wore a navy work jacket with no name on the chest. Oliver Bennett jumped out of the passenger side and dropped a toolbox on the ground without ceremony. 2 men, 1 car, no equip beyond that. Sitting on the flat roof of the truck cab, cross-legged, watching everything with large brown eyes, was a girl of 7 years. Bonnie Cole wore a baseball cap that was 2 sizes too large for her head. It was red, the deep, worn red of something that had been loved for a long time, and it sat low across her forehead so that she had to tilt her chin up to see. On the front of the cap, in faded thread, were the letters CLAIRE. She held a small handmade flag in both hands, white paper folded over a chopstick, with the words, "Go Daddy," written in green crayon, in letters that climbed unevenly uphill. Matthew crouched at the front of car 47 and checked the tire pressure on the left front wheel. He did not need to look at a gauge. He pressed his thumb against the rubber, felt the resistance, moved to the right front without standing up. Oliver handed him a wrench, and he tightened a bolt on the lower control arm housing with 2 turns, then stopped. He pressed his ear briefly toward the hood, though the engine was not running. Some men look at machines. Matthew listened to them. 3 years earlier, he had been the chief engineer at Vance Motorsport, a mid-size racing outfit headquartered 40 miles north of the city. He had been there for 6 years. He had rebuilt the fuel injection mapping from scratch in his 2nd year and reduced their average lap time by 1.4 seconds. A number that sounds small until you understand that 1 second in a race is the length of a career. When Richard Vance acquired the company in a leveraged buyout and restructured the entire operation in a single quarter, Matthew Cole was handed a termination letter on a Tuesday. His wife Claire was admitted to the hospital that same Thursday with what the doctors called a complication they had missed for several months. She did not come home from that hospital. Bonnie was 4 years old. What Richard Vance never knew, what no one at Vance Motorsport ever bothered to find out, was that Claire Cole had once been an amateur rally driver, that the silver car in Matthew's garage was not something he had built from scratch. It was something they had been building together, on weekends, in the 2 years before Bonnie was born, pulling late nights in a rented garage space with a space heater and a second-hand welder. The car had never been finished. Matthew had finished it alone, over the following 2 years, in the same garage, with a space heater and a baby monitor on the shelf above the workbench. He did not enter the Harmon Grand Prix because he thought he could win. He entered because Claire had once said, sitting on an overturned milk crate with engine grease on her cheekbone and a cup of cold coffee in her hand, "One day we are going to race at Harmon, together." This was the closest he could get to together. Bonnie waved her flag once, at no one in particular, and then held it still. The Harmon Grand Prix had been running for 40 years, funded in its early decades by the founding Harmon family, and in more recent years by the Harmon Racing Group, a mid-sized sports and entertainment company that had grown to include event management, sponsorship brokerage, and driver development. The current chief executive was Scarlett Harmon, who had taken the position at 22 after her father's death left the company without a clear successor. She was now 30 years old. She had run the company for 8 years. In those 8 years, she had never missed a quarterly earnings target, never issued a public apology, and never, not once, He'd been photographed at a race in anything other than a structured blazer and a composure that people mistook for coldness. On the morning that Matthew Cole pulled his trailer into pit lane, Scarlett was in the VIP tower reading a risk summary for the following fiscal quarter. The document was 12 pages. She had already reached page 9. Sebastian Cross set a cup of coffee on the desk beside her without being asked. He was her senior aide, 31 years old, precise in everything he did, including the temperature at which he knew she preferred her coffee. He opened his tablet and scrolled through the morning's administrative items. "Final entry list for the race," he said. 12 drivers confirmed. 1 independent. Scarlett turned a page. Name: Matthew Cole. Sebastian paused in a way that was not quite a pause. No sponsor affiliation, no team registration, no competitive record on file. Scarlett did not look up. Any rule violation? None. Then he races. She turned another page. Sebastian set the tablet down. He had worked for Scarlett Harmon for 4 years, and he had learned that the conversations she did not continue were sometimes more meaningful than the ones she did. She had not continued this one. But she had, in the moment after he said the name Matthew Cole, gone very slightly still, not enough for anyone else to notice. Sebastian noticed. He would not ask about it. He never asked about things like that. He simply made a note to pull the file on Matthew Cole before lunch. Richard Vance arrived in the VIP lounge 40 minutes later, moving the way men move when they have won something many times and have begun to believe that winning is a property of their character rather than a product of their preparation. He was 38 years old and had taken first place at the Harmon Grand Prix in 4 of the last 5 years. He wore his team's colors on a fitted jacket and shook Scarlett's hand with the ease of someone who had practiced making ease look natural. "Good morning, Richard," Scarlett said. "Good morning." He sat without being invited to sit. "I see you let a mechanic enter the race." Scarlett did not react. "We have an open registration process." Richard smiled. "Of course we do." He reached for the coffee Sebastian had not offered him. "I'm just saying, when a man shows up with a grocery list and a socket wrench and asks to run against professionals, it says something about the quality of the field." He paused. "Or the quality of the competition standards." Scarlett looked at him for 1 flat second. "The competition standards are mine to set." Richard raised both hands lightly, a gesture that said, "I meant nothing by it," in the same breath that it said, "I meant everything by it." He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the window. When his back was turned, Scarlett looked down at her document. She did not read it. She was looking at the bottom of the page where the words were, but she was not seeing them. She was seeing instead the termination order she had signed in the first month after taking control of Vance Motorsport, a document that had crossed her desk as item 14 of 23 on a restructuring list, and which she had signed without reading the individual names, because there had been 61 names, and she had been 22 years old and running a company for the first time, and there had been 22 other documents waiting after that one. She turned toward the window. In the pit lane below, she could see a man in a navy jacket crouching beside a silver car, checking something on the rear suspension. Beside him, a small girl in a red cap was carefully refolding her paper flag. Scarlett looked at them for 3 seconds. Then she looked away. The press conference for the drivers took place at mid-morning in a low building beside the main grandstand. There were 11 drivers in a line, in their team colors, in front of a backdrop printed with sponsor names. Matthew stood at the far end of the line in his navy work jacket. He had cleaned his hands, but the thumbnail was still slightly dark. He stood with his weight even on both feet, and his arms loose at his sides, which is how people stand when they are not performing anything for anyone. Richard Vance approached the podium microphone first, and before he said anything about the race, he looked down the line at Matthew with the extended, deliberate look of a man who wants a room to follow his gaze. The room followed. "Who let the shop foreman in?" Richard said. He did not shout it. He said it at conversational volume, which was worse, because it suggested he did not need to perform. Laughter moved through the room, the way laughter moves when people are not sure if they should be laughing, but do not want to be the one who does not. Matthew did not move. He did not look at Richard. He looked at a fixed point on the back wall of the room, and he kept his face exactly as it was. A reporter from a regional motorsport outlet, young, with a press lanyard that still looked new, stepped in front of Matthew when the formal portion concluded. She held a recorder up. "Mr. Cole, do you have a team sponsor for this race?" "No." "A technical crew?" "2 people." She hesitated. "Do you think you have a realistic chance of competing at this level?" Matthew looked at the recorder for a moment, then at the reporter. "I'm not here to have a chance," he said. "I'm here to race." She wrote something down. It was not a quote that fit cleanly into any category she had prepared for. She looked at it for a moment, and then looked back up, but Matthew had already moved toward the exit. In the front row of the observers section, Scarlett sat with Sebastian, 3 seats to her right. She had watched the entire press conference without expression. When Richard made his comment at the microphone, she had not smiled or frowned. She had turned the silver ring on her right hand, a small thing, shaped like a gear, plain, no stone, 1 rotation clockwise with her thumb, then stopped. Sebastian watched her hand. He said nothing. Outside, Bonnie Cole was sitting on the tailgate of the truck eating a sandwich when Matthew came out of the building. She slid off the tailgate and ran to him and pressed her face against his ribs. He put one hand on the back of her head. "They were mean," she said. "Some people are. Are you sad?" Matthew crouched, so they were level. "No." Bonnie studied his face with the frank, unembellished attention of a child who has spent enough time with one parent to know when that parent is telling a half-truth. "You make a face when you're sad," she said. "You always think you don't, but you do." He looked at her. Then the corner of his mouth moved, not a full smile, but the beginning of one, the kind that happens before a person decides whether to allow the rest of it. It was the first time anything on his face had shifted since he arrived at the circuit. 40 feet away, Richard Vance was standing with a small cluster of reporters. He noticed Bonnie. He noticed the cameras pointing at her. He walked over with his hands open and his best television smile and crouched beside her, positioning himself so that the cameras behind him could see his profile and the child simultaneously. Bonnie looked at him. She did not smile back. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Richard said. "Bonnie. Is that your dad over there?" "Yes. He's pretty brave, coming out here today." He said it the way adults say things to children that are intended for other adults to hear. Bonnie considered this. "You're the one who fired him," she said. It was not accusatory. It was stated with the flat certainty of a fact she had heard mentioned once and retained without ceremony. "You're not his friend." Richard's smile held for 2 beats too long, and then he stood, nodded at the cameras as though this had been a pleasant interaction, and walked back toward the building. One of the reporters let the camera drop slightly. Another one scribbled something in a notebook. The photograph that a third one had already taken, the one that showed Matthew crouching with Bonnie's small hand pressed to his jaw, the oversized red cap catching the light, both of them looking only at each other, was already uploaded, and would be the image that most people, by end of day, associated with car 47. The qualifying session ran the following morning under a pale sky that had not yet decided whether it intended to rain. The track surface was damp in the first sector and dry from the second sector onward. Richard Vance set the fastest time of the session, 1 minute 40, 2.3 seconds. His crew celebrated with the specific, calibrated enthusiasm of people who had expected this result. The gap back to the second-place driver was nearly a full second. Matthew went out 11th of 12. Oliver stood at the pit wall with a stopwatch he had owned for 15 years and which he did not entirely trust but had never replaced. When Matthew pulled out of the pit lane and the car reached the first corner, the sound changed. It was not louder. The other cars in the session had been louder, turbocharged units with big intercoolers and wideband exhausts tuned for the gallery. Car 47 was different. The sound it produced was lower in pitch and denser in texture, the way a room sounds different when it is built with thick walls rather than thin ones. A circuit engineer standing behind Sebastian at the timing tower lifted his eyes from his laptop. He did not say anything. He just looked at the track. Matthew posted 1:43.8, slower than Richard by 1.5 seconds, on a damp track, on tires that had already seen several hundred miles of testing. But the line he drove through the long right-hand sweeper in Sector 2 was not the line the other drivers had taken. It was tighter on entry and wider on exit. a geometry that sacrificed early apex for maximum exit speed, the kind of choice that costs you a tenth in the corner and gains you 3 on the straight. The other drivers had used the line they always used because it was the line that worked. Matthew had used a different line because he had looked at the corner as an engineer and decided the common approach was wrong. Sebastian had been recording the lap on his phone. He carried the footage upstairs and set the phone on the desk in front of Scarlett. She watched it once. She watched it a second time. She set the phone face down on the desk and looked at the window for 4 seconds. Then she stood and walked out of the tower without telling Sebastian where she was going. She found Matthew at the rear of car 47, studying the tire wear on the left rear. He was squatting with his forearms on his knees, and he had the focused, interior expression of someone conducting a private argument with a problem that has not yet decided to cooperate. Oliver was beside him with a notebook, writing something. Scarlett stopped 2 meters away. "You designed the intake system yourself," she said. It was not a question precisely, but it was not quite a statement either. It occupied the narrow space between. Matthew looked up at her. He had the unhurried attention of someone who decides in the first second whether a conversation is worth having and then commits completely if it is. He looked at her long enough to make the assessment. "You already know the answer," he said. "You're the CEO. You would have had the technical inspection report on your desk by 8 this morning. I want to hear it from you." He was quiet for a beat. "Yes, took 2 years." Scarlett looked at the car. At the intake manifold, visible through the engine cover grille, the custom housing, the feed lines that were not standard configuration. She looked at it the way she would look at any engineering document she was being asked to assess methodically, from first principles, without reaching a conclusion before she had the evidence. "It's a volumetric efficiency modification," she said. "You changed the plenum geometry." Matthew did not move. "You know intake engineering. I know a few things." She said it flatly, with no invitation in the tone. She looked at the car for 1 more second, and then looked at him. "The inspection team cleared it completely." "I know. Then you'll race tomorrow." She turned to go. From behind her, Matthew said nothing more. Oliver watched Scarlett walk away, and then looked at Matthew, with his mouth slightly open. From across the pit lane, running on short legs with a half-eaten apple in one hand, came Bonnie. She climbed up the side of the car and sat on the doorsill and looked at Scarlett, who had stopped walking without entirely meaning to. "Is our car pretty?" Bonnie asked. Scarlett looked at her. The girl looked back with complete seriousness, the apple held to one side so as not to interrupt the interaction. "Yes," Scarlett said. 1 word, no decoration. But she said it without the CEO voice. She said it with the one she used when she was not performing anything for anyone. Bonnie nodded, satisfied, and bit the apple. That evening, Sebastian forwarded Scarlett a document he had pulled from the employment archive of Vance Motorsport. It was 2 pages. The relevant line was near the bottom. Reason for separation, structural reorganization, executive authorization. Authorization signature, S. Harmon. Scarlett stood in the elevator of the hotel across from the circuit, with her phone in her hand and the document open on the screen. She did not press the button for her floor. The elevator waited. The doors stayed open. She looked at her own signature at the bottom of a decision she could not remember making about a man whose name she had not known until yesterday. She pressed the button for her floor. The doors closed. At 11:17 that night, while Matthew and Oliver had stepped out for coffee, a man named Derek entered the garage where car 47 was parked. He wore a maintenance uniform and a staff lanyard. He spent 7 minutes inside the garage. He made 2 modifications. He adjusted the thermal regulation valve on the coolant circuit so that the engine would begin to overheat at the point of maximum sustained load, somewhere between lap 7 and lap 9. And he loosened the right front wheel, the carrier bolt, by precisely enough that it would hold for the first 8 laps of hard racing and fail on the 9th, under high lateral load in the long sweeping corner at the back of the circuit. He left the garage at 11:24. He did not see the camera mounted above the external door, which had been installed the previous season after an unrelated equipment theft, and which continued to record without interruption. Matthew could not sleep. He sat in the narrow corridor outside the room where Bonnie was sleeping and looked at the floor for a long time. Then he opened his wallet. Inside, behind his driver's license and a folded receipt for fuel he had never thrown away, was a photograph. It was small and slightly creased at one corner. In it, a woman sat behind the wheel of a silver car, the same silver, the same flat matte finish in a garage with bare concrete walls. She was laughing at something off camera. She had grease on one cheekbone. She did not know she was being photographed. Matthew had taken it without asking, because she looked, in that moment, like the version of herself she did not always let people see. He looked at the photograph for a while. Then he put it back in the wallet and sat with his hands loose between his knees and the corridor silent around him. In the morning, Oliver arrived at the garage before Matthew. He opened the engine cover to begin the pre-race inspection and stopped. He looked at the coolant circuit for 11 seconds. Then he got down on the ground and looked at the right front carrier assembly for 4 more seconds. He called Matthew's number. Matthew answered on the first ring. When he arrived at the garage, Oliver pointed. Matthew crouched. He looked at the valve setting, not a failure, not a crack, not anything that would show up on a standard inspection checklist. A deliberate adjustment. He moved to the wheel assembly and looked at the bolt. He did not touch it. He stood up. "Report it," Oliver said. Matthew looked at the garage ceiling. "We can't prove who, and if we make noise now, they find a procedural reason to delay the start. We're out before we roll. So we just fix it?" "We fix it." Matthew crouched again at the coolant valve. "Give me 15 minutes. At 6:41 that morning, in a room on the 4th floor of the hotel across from the circuit, Sebastian Cross was reviewing overnight camera footage from the circuit's security system as part of a standard pre-race operational review, a procedure that had been established after the equipment theft 2 seasons prior. He saw the figure at 11:17. He saw the 7 minutes. He saw the exit at 11:24. He knew who Derek was. Derek had worked the technical staff for 3 seasons. Sebastian saved the file and sat with his hands folded on the desk for a moment. Then he knocked on the door of the adjoining room. Scarlett opened it in 30 seconds, already dressed, coffee in hand. Sebastian held up his tablet without saying anything. She watched the clip, the timestamp, the uniform, the lanyard, the angle that showed clearly the right front wheel assembly. "Who does Derek work for?" she said. Sebastian said nothing. Scarlett looked at him. "Sebastian, he's been on retainer with Vance Motorsport for 2 seasons, Sebastian said. "Off book." Scarlett set her coffee down on the nearest flat surface. She looked out the window at the circuit. The lights were on in the garages. The morning was gray and still. "Don't delete the file," she said. "Don't tell anyone." She picked up her phone and walked to the window. Race morning arrived with a sky that had cleared overnight to a hard, clean blue. The circuit filled from 6 in the morning crews, officials, vendors, the first of the spectators. By 9 the grandstands were half full, and by 10 they were 3/4. Matthew ate breakfast with Bonnie in the cab of the truck, a container of yogurt for her, a black coffee, and a protein bar for him. Bonnie ate with methodical seriousness and did not speak until she was finished. "Are you scared?" she asked. "No," Matthew said. She looked at him. The look was the same look she had given him the day before, the one that saw through the short answer. "You make a face," she said. "I told you I don't." "You do, though." He was quiet for a second. Then, "A little." Bonnie put her yogurt container down and reached behind her. From the small bag on the back seat, she pulled the red cap and held it out to him. "Mom said this one keeps people from getting lost." She placed it on his head. It sat too far forward, and he could not see properly. She said it worked on her every time. Matthew reached up and held the brim for a moment, without adjusting it. He looked at Bonnie. She looked back. He took the cap off and held it carefully, and set it on the seat between them. 40 minutes before the start, he put his helmet on instead, and gave the red cap back to Bonnie. She put it on her own head and climbed up to the metal railing at the edge of the spectator area, 6 feet from the pit lane entrance, and locked both hands around the bar. Scarlett came down from the tower 20 minutes before the scheduled start. She walked along the pit lane with purpose, which is how she always walked. so no one who saw her had any particular reason to wonder where she was going. She had her phone in her hand, and she was scrolling nothing on the screen, which was unusual, because Scarlett Harmon never held her phone without using it. She walked to a certain bay and stopped. Matthew was in the cockpit, running through his dashboard checks. Oliver was at the rear of the car with his checklist. Scarlett stood at the nose of car 47 and waited. Matthew looked down. He said nothing for a moment, the way you say nothing when you are deciding what the correct level of wariness is for a given situation. "I know about the valve," Scarlett said, "and the wheel bolt." The silence between them had weight. "And I know who sent someone in last night," she said. "I have the footage. I have 2 seasons of financial records connecting Derek to Vance Motorsport." She paused. "I've already made the call." Matthew looked at her steadily. "What call?" "Richard is withdrawing from the race. Mechanical issue, as far as the official record goes. The real record stays with me." Her voice had the controlled flatness of someone delivering information who has thought carefully about what to include and what to withhold, and has withheld nothing. "Derek is terminated. The file goes to the racing board after today." Oliver had stopped writing on his checklist. He was standing very still at the rear of the car. Matthew said, "Why are you telling me this yourself?" Scarlett held the look, without deflecting it. "Because I owe you that much. Possibly more." She let a single beat pass. "And because you have 12 positions to make up in 3 laps, and you should be thinking about that instead of wondering if the car is going to hold." She put one hand on the nose of the car, not a grip, just a touch, the flat of her palm for 2 seconds, the way a person touches something they understand from the inside. Then, she pulled her hand back and stepped away. Matthew watched her go for 3 seconds. Then he looked down at the lower left corner of his dashboard. Scratched into the matte finish of the housing, small enough that no one else had ever noticed it or asked about it, was a single letter. C. He put both hands on the wheel. The race started at 10 o'clock under the hard blue sky. 12 cars, though by the time the formation lap was complete, only 11 reached the starting grid. Car number 1, driven by Richard Vance, was listed as a late withdrawal for unspecified technical reasons. The announcement created a murmur in the grandstands and a brief cluster of confusion among the press corps. And then the lights came on, and the race began, and everyone looked at the track instead. Matthew started 11th. He spent the first 5 laps doing what an engineer does before he commits. He read the race. He watched the braking points of the cars ahead of him. He watched where they drifted in the fast corners and where they left the inside of the slow ones unprotected. He watched where the rubber had laid down on the racing line and calculated where grip was highest and where the approach to that grip could be made unconventionally. Oliver's voice came through the in-ear radio, steady and calibrated, giving him tire temperatures and sector splits. On lap 6, he began to move. He did not use the obvious passes straight-line speed differences at the end of the long back section, where every driver in every race at every circuit tries to make up time. He used the corners. He used the gap that opened when a driver who had been driving the same line for 12 seasons was unwilling to commit to a late apex on the entry to the chicane. He used the half-second of indecision that appeared, reliably, at the top of the brake zone for the hairpin when a driver had traffic on his left. 11th to 9th, 9th to 7th. Oliver stopped talking. He was counting. On lap 7, car 47 came out of the final corner of the second sector and entered the long sweeper that fed into the main straight. Matthew was in 5th position. He had been carrying the car at perhaps 70% of what it was capable of, because he had not yet found the precise threshold of the suspension tuning on this particular track surface, and because an engineer does not ask a system for everything until he understands exactly what everything is. He found it in the middle of that corner. He felt the rear grip settle, not slip, not break away, but settle, the way a foundation settles when it has found bedrock, and he understood, in the specific way that comes only from having designed every component of a system from first principles, exactly what the car could do. He asked it for all of it. The sound changed. It happened at the point of maximum corner loading, when the intake system reached the operating pressure it had been built for, and the full volumetric capacity of the modified plenum came into effect. The engine note dropped half an octave and widened in its tonal character, and became something that did not sound like a race car at racing speed. It sounded like something older and less complicated, a thing that had been held back for a long time and was no longer being held back. On the main grandstand, 2,000 people heard it at the same moment. The talking stopped first, then the movement stopped. Then the people who had been watching the timing screens looked up at the track instead, because there was something in the sound that made screens irrelevant. Car 47 came out of the sweeper at a speed that the timing system recorded, but that looked, from the grandstand, like something the timing system had gotten wrong. It went past 2 cars on the straight before the braking zone and was not braking yet. 5th, 4th, 3rd. Oliver was not counting anymore. He was gripping the pit wall with both hands and watching. Bonnie was standing on the second rail of the spectator barrier, both feet off the ground, both hands locked around the top bar, hat pushed back on her head. She was saying something repeatedly that could not be heard over the sound of the engines. Her knuckles were white. Scarlett stood at the edge of the pit lane, 20 feet from the wall, by herself. Sebastian was somewhere behind her. She was watching the track. Her right hand was at her side, and her thumb, which for 2 days had been turning the gear-shaped ring in small rotations that she made, without noticing that thumb was still. The ring was still. She was holding it without moving it, the way a person holds something when they have stopped the habit and are not yet sure what to do with the stillness. The final lap. 3rd position to 2nd on the approach to the technical section, a chicane that required 2 direction changes in rapid succession and where the fastest line was also the least obvious, cutting inside of where every driver placed their car, because every driver had been taught to leave a margin that Matthew's calculations told him was unnecessary. 2nd to 1st at the 300-meter board before the final corner, because the driver who had been leading had braked where he always braked and Matthew had not. He drove the last 400 meters to the finish line without lifting. The silence lasted for approximately 1 second after car 47 crossed the line. 1 second in which the grandstand had received information from its eyes that its expectations had not yet authorized its voice to respond to. 1 second in which 1,100 races of habitual outcome were being revised by a single exception. Then the noise came. Matthew brought the car to a stop in the finish area and sat inside it for a moment, with the engine running. Oliver's voice was in his ear, but Matthew was not hearing the words. He was aware of the sound of the crowd the way you are aware of weather, as something that surrounds you but is not the thing you are looking at. He was looking at the lower left corner of his dashboard, at the letters scratched into the housing. 1 letter. He put his right hand over it. He sat there for 3 seconds. Then he opened the door and climbed out. Oliver was running across the track before Matthew's feet hit the ground, and the noise that Oliver made was not a word. It was a sound that had no structure, but contained everything necessary. He grabbed Matthew by both shoulders and said something twice that could not be made out over the grandstand. From the spectator barrier, a small figure in a red cap was moving through a gap in the crowd. A marshal started forward to stop her, and then a woman who had come to stand near the barrier entrance shook her head once, briefly, without looking at the marshal, and the marshal stopped. Bonnie ran across the tarmac and hit Matthew at approximately waist height with both arms out and did not let go. Matthew put both arms around her. He stood there on the track with his race suit and his daughter and the noise of the crowd around them, and he did not move for a long time. Later, when the podium ceremony was complete and the crowd had begun to thin and the television crews had broken down their equipment, Scarlett found Matthew in the parking area beside the hospitality units. He was carrying his helmet in one hand, and Bonnie was walking beside him, leaning against his leg with every other step, using him as a support the way children do when they are tired but unwilling to admit it. Scarlett walked toward them and stopped. "I owe you an apology," she said. She did not build to it. She did not qualify it. The termination order in 2021. I signed it as part of a batch authorization. I didn't read the individual files. She paused. "I should have." Matthew looked at her for a moment. "You know that doesn't change anything that happened." "Yes. You know it doesn't fix the last 3 years." "I know that too." She held the look. "I still needed to say it." He was quiet. Then, "Okay, I heard you." He turned the helmet over in his hand, looking at it. "Then, you drove." It was not a question, and it was not a statement. It was a specific kind of sentence that exists between people who recognize something in each other, the sentence that names the thing neither person has said aloud. Scarlett looked down at the ring on her hand, the small silver gear. 8 years ago. Do you miss it? She looked up, and for the first time in the 2 days that Matthew Cole had known who Scarlett Harmon was, for the first time in the 2 days that Scarlett Harmon had been somewhere in the vicinity of the person she used to be, before she became the person she was required to be, she smiled. Not the controlled expression she deployed in conference rooms and at podium ceremonies. Something else. Something that looked like the answer to a question she had stopped allowing herself to ask. Every day, she said. Bonnie tugged at Matthew's hand. Daddy, can we get ice cream? We can. Bonnie turned to Scarlett with the unguarded directness of a child who has already made her assessment and sees no reason to hide it. You should come, she said. You helped. Scarlett looked at Matthew. He was looking somewhere past her left shoulder with an expression that was not quite neutrality and not quite anything else, and the corner of his mouth had the same quality it had had that morning, in the truck cab, the beginning of something. A movement that had not yet decided whether to complete itself. All right, Scarlett said. The three of them walked toward the circuit gate, Matthew with the helmet at his side and Bonnie between them, holding her paper flag in one hand and reaching up with the other to take hold of Scarlett's wrist. Not the hand, just the wrist, lightly, the way a child leads an adult somewhere when they are not sure the adult will follow on their own. Behind them, on the empty track, Car 47 sat in the dimming afternoon light, the silver finish catching the last of the sun. The grandstands were quiet now. The banners moved slightly in a wind that had come up from the west. Inside the cockpit, in the shadow where no one could see it, the small letter scratched into the dashboard housing held still in the dark, the way things hold still when they have done what they were meant to do.